Wanted to take a look at AMD stock, Advanced Micro stock, of course, but I'm looking at it from a value investing standpoint, and I'm taking a look at the future revenue increases that analysts are expecting, and what is AMD stock worth? What would be a good AMD stock analysis or price projection? And I wanted to break this down, showing what the future revenue outlook looks like given AI, the big expansion we've been seeing with revenue. Of course, Nvidia has been taking off. What happens with AMD stock? Thing is, with AMD stock, plain and simple, way overpriced, will come down. Bottom line is that analysts are over predicting numbers for AMD stock, and this is why we've been seeing some moves lower in AMD stock since their financials they just released a couple 2, 3, 4 days ago. Let's jump in. I want to break down from a value investing standpoint AMD stock to give you a good price projection of what would be a solid price point for AMD stock. Let's jump in. Here's a great little article out of Benzinga that AMD is failing to kind of meet really lofty expectations that analysts are really hoping that AMD can soar like Nvidia. The fact is, Nvidia is as big as they are and dominate within AI stocks. AMD stock is not meeting that expectation. Taking a look at revenue projections, you don't really see the big gains for AMD stock until you get into 2025, 2026. So for right now, and even given revenue gains in 2025, AMD stock is overpriced. Taking a look at since the release of the financial numbers, saw a pretty big pop to the downside. Now stocks, broadly speaking, are continuing to move a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. We get some inflation data coming in this week. We also have the Federal Reserve is going to be meeting in a couple weeks. Expectations are interest rates will remain higher for longer. The economy itself is slightly contracting. So likely what's going to happen is the broader stock market is going to move lower over the course of, say, September, October, November. I expect May, June, July, August for the stock market to be moving sideways. This will allow AMD stock to move back upward simply because of all the hope. But the reality is the economy itself is probably going to start being contracted too much because of interest rates being higher. We'll see a big sell-off September, October, November, maybe into December with the stock market, and that's likely to bring AMD stock downward even more. Then AMD stock has a chance of being a little bit more of a value investment. Here's a look at the weekly chart. Huge drop downward on AMD stock after popping up well above 210. I wanted to kind of show, this is SOXX ETF, which is a stock. It's the one of the semiconductor ETFs. And broadly speaking, AMD has followed, of course, but all these stocks are kind of moving in that direction. Reality is catching up with AMD that they're not going to perform like Nvidia, plain and simple. A lot of people were hoping that they missed Nvidia's move, and so they're getting into all these others saying, hey, listen, they'll catch up, they'll catch up. Reality is AMD is not going to catch up and take off like Nvidia, plain and simple. But there's a lot who are holding on to that reality, and it's just not going to pan out. All right, quarterly revenue, small decline. This is still slightly more than some analysts had expected. But what I want to take a look at is 2024, finishing up the year, 25.6. Huge move higher, 32.7 for 2025. From a value investment for AMD stock, this is what I really want to kind of focus on is what would you be willing to pay for AMD stock today, given the big gain in 2025? Unfortunately, you'd probably want to pay a lot less. Gross margins, 40%, near 39.6% for the quarter. This is where I have a tough time with AMD stock simply because of their low operating margins, because that translates into net margins that are fairly thin. Margins, broadly speaking, are going to be thinner on something like this, that it's a volume game when it comes to semiconductors, 2.3%, well below the S&P 500. Price to earnings ratio, 263.6. This really encapsulates where AMD stock is relative to its actual, what the AMD is actually performing at. 2024, $3.50 is the estimate for the rest of the year. 556 for 2025, and that's really what I'm going to kind of focus on. Looking at 350 for this year alone. Keep in mind the price to earnings ratio. You're looking, if they actually hit 350 for this year, you're looking at right now buying into 2.3% yield. Not exactly outstanding. The 550 from 2025 is what I wanted to kind of look at. And if you take a look at that stock price or the earnings per share for AMD stock, the 550, what's a reasonable return if they were to get that 550 this year? You're looking at only about $100 if you wanted to get, say, 5% return. U.S. 10-year Treasury trading at 4.5%. This is Warren Buffett's sort of metric where he's looking at for what's the measuring stick. From a Treasury yield at being the sort of benchmark rate, that's what you measure everything to. Right now, if you bought into the Treasury yield, you'd be guaranteed that 4.5% on the 10-year for the next 10 years. Thing is, with the Federal Reserve, eventually they're going to be lowering interest rates. Because they do that, price goes up for Treasury bonds. Once the Federal Reserve drops interest rates, and if the 10-year were to hit, say, 3%, 2.75, 2.5%, or maybe 3.5%, if you're holding Treasury bonds at 4.5%, that's going to be worth a lot more than Treasury bonds that would be trading at, say, 2.25%. Warren Buffett just dumped 13% of his Apple shares, and he's probably selling even more, especially after Apple stock itself popped up as much as it did, because Apple stock is yielding well below the Treasury yield at 4.5%. So given AMD's stock price at 152, you'd want to see AMD stock fall well below 100 just to beat the Treasury yield. Now everybody's going to be pounding their chest, yeah, but this revenue growth. Well, I already priced that in. The 550 is 2025's earnings per share. That's what I'm calculating. AMD stock is well overpriced. More than likely, a lot of competitors between now and the time that 550 starts showing up, which is a year from now, a lot of competitors are going to start eating away at all this tremendous growth. So these growth stocks are going to sputter out as growth stocks. At the same time, the economy is probably going to be contracting somewhat because of interest rates being too high. AMD stock has a very high risk level. It's overpriced relative to the future revenue and earnings that it's going to be producing, even with AI. Given that, I see AMD stock moving much lower, by about 30 to 40% lower. It's already come down hard off of 210. This slide, just the beginning. Look for price movements all through September, October, November, December, and we're targeting at least $100, then sub 100. At that point, now you're looking at AMD stock. If it were to hit its revenue gains, if it were to hit the 550 for 2025, then AMD stock becomes a value investment. Right now, way overpriced, not performing, plain and simple. AMD stock comes down. Make sure to hit the like and follow button if you want written content on this. I've got my Substack link as well. We'll see you in the next video.